Hi, I'm Julie Spencer, author of the Buxton Peak series, and this is Buxton Peak Book 1, Who is Ian Taylor? And we're going to read Chapter 8 next. When we left off at the end of Chapter 7, Megan had just said yes to Ian's proposal, so now they're engaged. Pretty cool. Now it's Thanksgiving break, and they are at Megan's mom's house, okay? So this is Chapter 8, Mom's the Word. So, I've got it all planned out in my mind. Ian snuggled into the corner of the plush sectional and rested his head on Megan's shoulder. The Thanksgiving Day parade on television they were supposed to be watching, and the popcorn her mom had made for them were temporarily forgotten. I'll make all the arrangements, and all you have to do is show up at the airport and we'll fly you across the pond. I went to Canada once. That's as far outside of the U.S. as I've gotten. That doesn't count. Canada's included in my North American tour, so it doesn't count. Sorry, love. You're coming to see my family at Christmas. Fine, Megan sighed in mock exasperation. If I must fly to England on holiday, then that is what I'll do. She grinned at him, and he enjoyed her teasing and the use of the word holiday instead of the more traditional American way of saying vacation. My mom will spoil you rotten, and I'll show you all the cool places where I hung out when I was a little boy. Discreetly, of course. Of course, like I said, I have it all planned out. He pulled himself out from under her so that he could look right at her, and his conversation became much more animated as his excitement grew. We'll fly you across the pond 2 or 3 days before our tour ends, and you can hang out with my mom until I get there. The press will never suspect it because they're still looking for you here. It was true. They were relentlessly trying to find the mysterious girlfriend named Megan, and the rumors were flying. Megan's mom had made it her mission to read every tabloid magazine full of photos of Ian with other girls, most of which were from years ago. She would bring him another copy, and he explained the situation of this kiss at a New Year's Eve party, or that girl who threw herself on him and someone happened to have taken a photo at just the right time. She also watched every celebrity talk show where the hosts and guests speculated about Megan. Who is she? Where is she from? Where did she meet Ian? One blogger actually had come uncomfortably close to the truth as she picked apart his North American tour around the time Ian said he'd met Megan. She narrowed down the time frame between his performance in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the show 3 days later in Detroit, Michigan. She also somehow knew he was a good Mormon boy who would have likely gone to church that Sunday, and that he'd want to marry a good Mormon girl. So she had pulled up maps showing where various Latter-day Saint church buildings were located in between two cities, and speculated that he would have probably traveled north through the Upper Peninsula because it was beautiful that time of year. She guessed that he attended church that weekend in Gaylord, which is less than an hour north of where Ian had actually met Megan at the Houghton Lake meeting house. It was only a matter of time before they'd be discovered, but they were going to enjoy what remaining time they had in relative peace. Then Kai and I will fly home to Derbyshire and meet you there. He grinned as if he had it all worked out. Why is Kai coming with you? Megan frowned and creased her eyebrows. Because you want to bring Rhonda along, and Kai's dying to see her again. He thought it was obvious, but Megan's confused expression caused him to add a qualifier. They've been texting back and forth since that first night in Mount Pleasant. You're kidding. No, I'm not, I promise. I don't think they're in love or anything, but they're having fun. He grinned at her. Kai. Weird that she hadn't said anything about him. Her words trailed off, and she stared off into the room. I knew they had a connection in the plane, but I didn't think they'd taken it beyond that. I like the idea of bringing Rhonda to England. She's fun to be around. Still, Kai? Really? He's not bad once you get to know him, Ian said. He likes girls, though. Megan stared back at him and raised her eyebrows. As opposed to liking boys? Ian laughed at her. No, I mean he likes a lot of girls. He's always got to have a girl. Like, he'll bring them with him on tour. Sometimes I can't share a hotel room with him, that kind of thing. That's disgusting. Megan wrinkled her nose. So he just uses them? Well, he's very nice looking, you know. They just throw themselves at him, and he, likes having them around. What about you, Ian? Megan hesitated and then lowered her voice. Do girls throw themselves at you also? Oh, yeah, all the time. And do you, she gulped and hesitated, like having them around? Ian realized his mistake immediately and backtracked the conversation. No, oh, no, Megan, you couldn't possibly think. No. He got very serious, wondering how she could possibly not know. Megan, I'm waiting. He hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until she let it out, as if it were a huge relief. He reached over and took her hands, looking into her eyes with concern and compassion. Did you really question that? He wondered. Well, no, not really, she hesitated. It's just that you are kind of, affectionate at times. Ian couldn't help laughing at her, but it felt more like he was laughing at himself. He tried to stop laughing long enough to clarify something. Let me explain it to you this way. He looked her in the eye playfully. I've been waiting a long time. Understanding came into her eyes as if she got his message very clearly. He wasn't just waiting. He was looking forward to the day when he no longer had to wait. She kind of grinned and tucked herself back into his arms, avoiding looking him in the eye. Me too, Megan whispered. Girls didn't often admit these kinds of things, but he got the impression she was looking forward to that just as much as he was. He cuddled her into his arms for a brief moment and then pushed her away and got up off the sofa. He sheepishly reached out his hand to help her up. I think I'll go see if your dad has the ball game on, Ian said. Want to go check and see if your mom made any more popcorn? He leaned down and kissed her forehead and walked quickly from the room. He didn't even glance at the half-eaten bowl of popcorn still sitting on the couch. Okay, now we're on the airplane with Rhonda and Megan. You're such a hypocrite, Megan. Rhonda turned in her seat and crossed her arms. How can you tell me not to date Kai when you're practically engaged to Ian? Shh! Megan glanced around nervously, hoping none of the other passengers had heard her. Although Ian had assured her she'd be perfectly safe flying first class to England, she was certain saying the names Megan and Ian in the same sentence would likely turn heads. They were still an international gossip topic. It frustrated Megan because she had hoped things would have calmed down. It had been over a month since Ian had said her name on live television, and she thought they'd be old news by now. But with the release of their next single, written about her, the wrap-up of the band's North American tour, and the announcement that their new album would be coming out in January, their names had stayed in the headlines. It didn't help that Stacy Smith, the self-proclaimed expert on everything Buxton Peak, had narrowed down her blog search to a smaller and smaller geographic region, having realized there were 2 possible locations where Ian might have met Megan, located within an hour of each other. She was now seeking out members of the church in both the Gaylord area and the Houghton Lake area, asking if anyone recognized Ian last summer, and trying to find out if any college-age girls there were named Megan. It was lucky Ian and Megan met in a town where neither of them lived. It was one of the only things saving them from being discovered. That, and the demographics in the region, were mostly snowbirds, people who leave northern Michigan in the winter and head for the warmer weather of Florida or South Carolina. No one in either town admitted to seeing anyone fitting that description. But gossip television hosts were interviewing Stacy as if she were a reputable source of information, and unfortunately she was nearly exact in her analysis. Kai is not like Ian. He's a playboy. He's just out for a good time. Megan felt the exasperation of wanting to protect her friend, but knowing that Rhonda didn't share the same values as she did, Megan knew she was fighting a losing battle. I like that about him. He's hot and fun and sexy and hot. I can't wait to get that man alone. I hope you're joking, Megan pleaded. She turned and pushed the beverage tray up and out of her way. She gently grabbed Rhonda's arm, pleading with her. He would just be using you, and you know it. Megan, Rhonda scoffed at her best friend. She pulled her arm away and sneered at Megan, looking down her nose. I'm not some little virgin like you are. I'm not wasting my youth away hoping I'll meet Mr. Right and he'll be some choir boy who has no idea what to do on our wedding night. That's cruel. The insulting way Rhonda criticized her lifestyle brought tears to Megan's eyes, and she looked away. There was nothing to see out the darkened window except a blinking light on the wing, but she tried to hide the pain that was likely showing all over her face. Rhonda pulled Megan's arm to force her to turn and look at her. How do you think I feel when you offer your holier-than-thou recommendations about how I should and should not live my life? I mean, how are you going to know whether you're even compatible if you don't sleep together before you commit the rest of your life to this guy? Or in your case, the rest of eternity, if that exists. Megan had heard the same argument dozens of times over the years. There's more to marriage than sex. Megan believed it with all her heart, that the commitment she would make to Ian and the promises they would make with God were sacred and pure. They were promising to stand beside one another through the good times and the bad, forever. Sure, their wedding night, and every night after, was going to be something she was looking forward to, but it wasn't everything there was to marriage. It was just one little tiny portion of a sacred and pure union between a man and a woman. She didn't need to experience it before they were married to know it was going to be amazing. Yeah, right. I see the way Ian looks at you. He'll want to rip your white wedding dress off faster than he can get you in the hotel room. You think he's not marrying you for the sex? You're nuts. And furthermore, I see the way you look at him. You'll be ripping his tux off just as fast. Megan bit her lip, trying not to smile at how close Rhonda was to the truth. Although she was willing to wait, she was definitely looking forward to it. She blushed and looked away. You think he wouldn't have made a move on you last summer when you guys were making out on the beach if he hadn't had a bodyguard sitting 10 feet away? Rhonda smiled. No, he would not have. Megan folded her arms across her chest and half pouted, trying to keep the corners of her mouth from pulling up. Ed being there had nothing to do with it. Ian has stronger values than that. He pulled away from me long before it got that far. Yeah, but were you pulling away from him? Rhonda raised her eyebrows. How far would you have let it go? Megan wasn't sure how to answer that. She'd like to think she would have pushed Ian off of her long before he finally pulled himself away. She was suddenly embarrassed about how long she did let it go on. He had been the strong one in that situation. She realized how easily it could have gone the other way. Excuse me. The man in the seat in front of them turned around. You do realize I can hear everything you're saying, right? The girls stared straight at him in shock. He was young enough to easily know who they were, and the look on his face said he had definitely figured it out. This was exactly what Megan was worried about. She was embarrassed for their candor and brashness, but also panicked that he was going to blow their anonymity. She should have just pretended to be asleep so she could have avoided this conversation altogether. It was embarrassing and dangerous to her cover. He shook his head in mock disgust and mumbled as he turned around in his seat. Don't worry, your secrets are safe with me. Megan didn't like the way he had used the word secrets as plural. She was embarrassed and frustrated that the conversation had revealed way more secrets than it should have. Next section. Now she's in England and hanging out with Ian's mom. I can't believe we stayed up till midnight just to watch Ian on Access Hollywood. Ian's mom, Claire, came into the room with a handful of chocolate chip cookies, gave half of them to Megan, and plopped down on the sofa. He said he really laid into Stacy during the interview. Megan tucked her legs underneath her and settled in next to Ian's mom, or Mum, as she insisted on being called. They'd connected immediately, and Megan felt thankful to have a new kindred spirit in her life. She had no idea he was going to be on air with her, and it really threw her for a loop. Oh, it's starting. Claire shushed her as the Access Hollywood theme song came on. The host announced the top stories, mentioned they would have a special guest in the studio, and they were going to be interviewing Stacy Smith, the self-proclaimed expert on the rock band Buxton Peak. Did you catch how they used the word "and" there? Stacy thought she was the special guest. I guess it was classic. Megan sat back and bit into one of the cookies. After plowing through the top stories and sitting through 2 commercial breaks, they finally got around to Stacy's interview. While they were talking, the camera panned backstage to where Ian was waiting, grinning conspiratorially, ready to come out and surprise her. On cue, Ian came around the corner and the studio audience erupted in applause and cheers. Stacy turned around in her chair and gasped as Ian walked on stage. She seemed just as starstruck and excited about meeting him as every other one of his fans. She got up and raced to give him a hug, and he hugged her right back, all while grinning and waving to the audience. It took a few minutes to get everything settled down, and both Stacy and Ian seated with the host, and they got down to business. "I understand you have something you'd like to say to Stacy." The host handed the cue over to Ian. He cleared his throat and looked at Stacy. "I want you to stop hunting down my girlfriend." Ian grinned at her. There were cheers and boos from the audience as the same fickle fans shifted from wanting all the gossip on Ian Taylor to wanting this gossip columnist to leave him alone. It was all for show, of course. The publicity wasn't hurting either of them. This was just another distraction tactic to throw off those who were getting too close to the truth. "That's easy, Ian. All you have to do is tell us who she is and we can stop hunting." Stacy said it so matter-of-factly it made everyone laugh and applaud. He laughed along with them and gave the audience a chance to calm down before pleading for their sympathy. "She never wanted any fame, you know. How am I supposed to convince her to marry me if she's constantly afraid you're going to jump out of the shadows and start taking her photographs?" "So she hasn't said yes yet?" Stacy grinned, clearly setting him up. "I never said that," Ian responded with a sly smile. The audience played right into his act and they cheered and clapped. This was the first time Megan had watched an interview since the one on Good Morning America, and it was fun to see him charm the audience. She could understand why he was so beloved by his fans. The same infectious personality that had captured her heart had also captured millions of fans worldwide. Megan smiled at the thought that he was coming home to her. She felt like the luckiest girl in the world as she watched the boy she loved talk about her on television. "It's just that I'm heading back to the UK tomorrow, and I won't be here to protect her for a while. Then our European tour starts next month. I just want Megan to be able to live a normal life. I hope you can understand." He looked Stacy right in the eyes with a piercing intensity that bordered on flirtatious. She could barely form a coherent sentence in response to his request. She was so distracted. Soon after, the interview was complete, and Access Hollywood went on to their next story headline. Ian's mom turned off the television, sighed. "That was fun." Claire sat back in the sofa. "I always loved watching him on the telly." "Poor Stacy. I've been on the opposite end of those eyes, and there isn't much that can be done. You give in to just about any request when he looks at you that way." Megan shook her head and fell back into the soft cushions, leaning her head against Claire's shoulder. "I can tell that you're very much in love with my boy. I'm so glad he's found you." Megan had had a great time getting to know Claire the past few days. She knew the dynamic in the home would shift when the guys arrived the next day. Ian's parents had planned some simple family gatherings to celebrate Christmas, and then a festive New Year's Eve party on the day Megan and Rhonda would be leaving. It was just a distraction, of course. The girls wouldn't actually be going to the party. They'd just be using it as a ruse to sneak out during the confusion of cars coming and going. Everyone assumed there were already paparazzi camped out all around the family estate, so Megan and Rhonda had barely peeked their noses out the doors. Although there was an expanse of lawns between the home and the property line, they weren't taking any chances. "Speaking of boys," Megan pulled herself away and turned to Claire, rubbing her hands together. "What was Ian like when he was young?" "Mischievous," Claire said, "just like he is now. But the thing about Ian is that he has this charisma that always seems to get him out of trouble. I don't know how he does it." Claire shifted on the couch so she was facing Megan. She clucked her tongue and shook her head. Megan settled in for a juicy story and grabbed another cookie from the end table. I would blame it on those mates of his, but it was mostly him. They just followed along. This one time they nearly had their grammar school teacher a heart attack. Ian had snuck down the stairs when the teacher had gone to use the loo, and he laid on the ground outside the window. Those other 3 boys whipped up some fake tears and stood at the window crying as if Ian had jumped. Megan gasped and bit her lip, trying to keep from laughing aloud. Claire beat her to it and doubled over, laughing, slapping her thigh. Let's just say it was a good thing the teacher had used the loo before she saw Ian lying on the ground outside the 2nd-story window, or she may have needed to go home and change her knickers. Oh my gosh, they must have gotten in so much trouble. Not as much as the time they put firecrackers in the school toilets. Flooded the whole building. The principal wanted us to send them to boarding school. He said those boys wouldn't amount to a thing. What does he say now? Megan wondered. He asked them to do a benefit concert last year to raise money for new playground equipment. Ian nodded her head with finality. They both laughed and Megan yawned. Guess I'm still on Megan time, she joked. I'll tell you more stories tomorrow. Claire pushed herself off the sofa and scooped the crumbs from the end table. She turned off lamps as they made their way out of the living room. I'll dig out the photo albums, too. Now that I can't wait to see. Okay, that is the end of Chapter 8. And Chapter 9 is called The Babysitter. Okay, see you next time.